We are back today with the redoubtable Mr. Conrad Pope to finish off the chat we began the other day. And today we are on the lot of Nu Boyana Studios, which is owned by Millennium Pictures, based in Hollywood. And we're here thanks to Yariv Lerner and his assistant Brenda. Thank you, Yariv. And I think we're on what is supposed to be a New York street. You can judge whether or not how authentic it is. But it's great to be here with you again, Conrad. And I know we only have you for another 3 days. Conrad has been coaching, encouraging, cajoling, and when necessary, admonishing our current class of MFA composers as they prepare for their big session on Sunday, which is with an 84-piece orchestra, to which a 26-voice choir will be added. And I know the students are incredibly grateful for what you've given them. And I wanted to ask you something. I've noticed as you've reviewed a couple of these students' works, you occasionally will say, people will want to hear this. People will be interested in this. This will get you work. And I'm curious because this never really gets defined in our business. Can you quantify or codify what things you hear in a piece of work that make you say that it will get someone work?
I'm not sure I can codify it, but we can talk about it because in each case it's probably something a little bit different. And I would say that I'm thinking of one piece right now that I heard by one of the students where I thought that it was a piece of music. You know how there's some pieces of music tell you, listen to me. And some pieces of music say, listen to me. And just open yourself to this. And the music evolved in such a way that it allowed you to have many thoughts. I could see how somebody could feel sort of the emotional, that this could go to many scenes actually. And it might be a unique voice of how to sort of convey things, because these days, when I first came to Hollywood, I guess that one could say there's always been the industrial score, if you will, the studio score for the kind of studio pictures. Today, there are so many independent films and so many new voices in film that we're looking for people with a sort of their own voice or their own style, which is so hard to have. And of course, say two established composers, or I can name three. One might surprise people. I'd say John Williams has a very distinctive voice. And that might surprise many people. But the next two, I'm sure everyone will agree, is that Tom Newman helped redefine the sound of cinema, helped redefine even subtext, almost like Jerry Goldsmith. Early on with Lonely Are the Brave, Jerry was this sort of fresh voice with that particular film, actually, and was sort of the first guy with subtext, as we've talked about. And Tom Newman, by the same token, had just such a fresh approach that was just unexpected, and yet now has become something that's highly imitated. And Alexander Desplat has his own unique voice in many. It's not a style, it's a voice. And I suppose that that's the most important thing about both these gentlemen, Tom Newman and Alexander, and I'd say also about John as well, is that they have distinct voices, though some people might confuse it for style. But I just know that the music is in many different ways. And with the students is that you see them taking elements of classical music. In one student's case, they have sort of mashed together aspects of some Japanese anime and Hilary Hahn of one of her classical albums. And that's very fresh to me. And that it's a very genuine, and it's not something you hear every day. And I think that if you can bring something fresh to the medium, there's going to be a director that will speak to, because also directors are trying to find their way and their voice. But of course, there's also still, quote, the industrial score and the industrial film.
I think what you mentioned about that one particular score, this is important, because what you're saying is that the references that the composer made within the context of the piece, what in literature you might call them intertextual references. Oh, here he's alluding to something we know from Shakespeare. Oh, here he's alluding to something we know from comic books. etc. You can do the same thing in music. Your music can allude, as John Williams' music often does, to Richard Strauss or Verdi or Korngold or something like that. And these are indications not only that you know your field, but that you're clever enough to understand where those references actually apply to the project you're working on now. So if somebody quotes Lalo Schifrin in the context of an action cue, let's say, you're sending a signal out, not only to your employers, but to the audience, that you understand the territory you're in, right?
Yes, and then when you reference music that is not particularly known to the general public, what's incubating inside these young composers and what's going to influence them, just like what you were saying about, say, John, that here's somebody that has clearly absorbed all the classical literature and its forms and its ways of modulating and putting form together. And with these young composers, they're taking of some of the best of today's contemporary music, and that's always heartening to me because I was, like I said, I was a composer long before I was a film composer. I was a musician long before I was a film musician, and I'm just glad to see that kind of conversation between not only popular music, jazz, and today's classical music, that contemporary music is still having conversation with the young contemporary musicians as well as the music of the past. And I think that
Yeah, certain young composers, you listen to their work and you say, this person has their ear to the ground. Now, back in the 50s and 60s, I heard Elmer Bernstein's music. That would have been the impression I had of him. This is a guy who's actively listening to what's out there, not only in the concert world, but big band jazz, pop, you know, if necessary, folkloric music and so forth. All of these things find their way
yes.
into those watershed scores that he wrote. So you can't really write unless you know how to listen, right?
That's true. Just like, yeah, you can't write unless you read a lot. And I think that in a way that with a musician, it's important that you listen a lot and also play a lot and go out and discover other musicians and try to keep performing if you can. And that's what I just found so refreshing. Well, that happens almost every year I come. The students are always searching and always striving. And what's so great about this academy is that it's kind of a safe place for them to sort of explore and see things to film and try things to film, where the stakes aren't high with executives at some studio or even secretaries these days. It's like the joke goes with Disney, and I'm sure it's a joke of that. First it goes to the director, then it goes to the producer, then it goes to the vice president, then it goes to the president, then it goes to their secretaries, and then it finally goes to the valets. And once the valets approve of the song lyrics and everything, it gets in the picture. And so before they get in that process, the real tough process of what it means to be scoring films today. This is a safe place where they can expand their awareness and consciousness and find what they're comfortable with and what works for them and what they can take away that will help shape their own voices, that hopefully will get them noticed in the industry. And as I won't mention the composer's name, but he used to be very good with directors because he would go to them and say, "You're an artist and I'm an artist. Let's let the agent talk about money." But what was good was that the composer always kept saying, would remind the directors, that, particularly in post-production, when there's so much stress and you're worried about so many things, that you're still trying to make art and you're still trying to make a statement. And if that seed can be planted in all the students here, then they can have a long, vibrant career. And they can also feed off of their directors and know how to interact because, as Ravel said, all the arts are the same. It's just the mediums are different. But what you have to do in each art is probably pretty much the same in terms of architecture and how you construct form and whatnot. And if they're nurturing that inner artist, they can hope that they find that inner artist in their other peers. And that's what gives me hope for the future, is that if these young people cannot become jaded or become too professional, because I know in the music business there can be people that can be very jaded about it. And what's fresh here, again, is that I love to see these young people hitting for the fences, and this is the place to do it, and this is the place to find
Yeah.
themselves.
Well, we're not spending a whole lot of time, possibly not as much as we should, on the business development side of this, which has obviously become very, very important now that composers are their own publicists and often agents and producers and hairdressers. And we don't need to talk about that today. I do want to talk a little bit about this notion of having a voice, because there are two questions on the lips of every aspiring composer, and they're often afraid to ask them because they're so obvious. The first is the "how do I get a gig" question. But the second one is really more important, and that is, what does it take? And my answer to that for a number of years now is that it takes an authentic voice, that the filmmakers we recognize as cutting edge are all people who have an authentic eye, or at
Yes.
least we identify that. And they tend to want to work with artists who are equally defined. But nobody can actually say what this thing is. You know,
Yeah.
how do you get one? And I've had students come to me and say, I don't know what my voice is. Now, my position is that they do, but it takes some exploration, because it's probably been there for quite some time. It may have been that you were moved by Prokofiev's Peter and the Wolf when you were 7 years old, and you can never get the sound of those horns out of your head. It may have been some childhood experience. It may have been your first love. It may have been some traumatic event. But it's not just about music, is it? I mean, what makes for a distinctive voice is about lots of things.
I think it is about lots of things. I think that you're right, that part of it is your background and what moved you to get into music in the first place, what drove you to make this commitment, because it is a commitment, and because, as I've said, music is not something that you do, it's who you are. And I would say that probably your voice appears kind of as we were talking the other day about when you spot a film and everything, look at where the characters change, because life is a drama, and that there has to be some moment with all that stuff that you're carrying forward from childhood, all that music that's within you, that there's probably some crisis, maybe a creative challenge, or an important emotional moment in your life, a death of a parent or death of a spouse, in one case I can think of, that there is a kind of critical part that happens in your life that where you change because something opens up due to some emotional response that's buried within all that music that you have in you, where you go, oh. Or that's some even change that where you sort of go, this is what turns me on when I'm listening to this. And so, in a way, you have to have the music in you, and then you have to live, because that's the most important thing. And I think that that's where all the great film, when you think about the trauma of the refugee composers that we
Yeah.
had, is that Max Steiner, his life was one filled with, he was fleeing to the First World War that brought him to London from Austria. And then just the events of the 20th century, that there were just a number of things, and they shared that with even their colleagues, their orchestrators, their music editors, everyone from this sort of background. So I would say that there has to be, you have to absorb all the music, and then there's going to be a moment in your life that will be a catalyst. A genuine response to that moment will bring out that moment for you. And it could even just be the panic of finally getting a film that you don't know what to do, that there is no temp track, and that you have to experiment, and you don't stop until you break down that wall.
Yeah. You know, Conrad, we tend to talk about voice with respect to the author, the composer, but I think it applies equally to the craft that you're best known for, which is orchestration. And this is a paraphrase, so I'm not going to get this exactly right, but I think it was Maurice Ravel who, when asked to define orchestration, said, you know, deciding who plays what, that's instrumentation, and that's fundamental. Deciding how to create the cloud of mist around the flute solo, or the sense of impending thunderstorm or something like that around what's happening in the low brass. This this knowledge of how to mix colors is orchestration. And when we talk about the fact that Ravel was such an extraordinary orchestrator, Rimsky-Korsakov, people like this, what is it that gives an orchestrator his voice?
Well, I think in my own case is that it was one of those things that probably from very early on, I loved the orchestra. I played in various groups growing up. I played various instruments. I actually made it a point of coming up to play something from every family and whatnot. And I was always fascinated by that. And I actually, as I think I said in the last interview, I was fortunate enough to be in a town where a person with a very big music library gifted that to the library, and I got to read scores. Didn't quite understand them at the time because I didn't have the tools to. But it was something I was always interested in. And I always responded emotionally to the colors in the orchestra. And as I was saying before, you can't, anybody of our age has grown up with image and music, even when it's subconscious. And that I think that it's something that we absorb. And then I keep thinking, I have my own ideas of what those colors are of the palette. And like I was saying, mixing the clarinet with the noble horn with the morose clarinet, or not the morose, but it's a darker color. Viewings at times with the brass have its mutes, but also when you blend them with woodwinds, that's another way of transforming their attack and transforming their color. And being able to respond to cinema. I love seeing the film that I'm orchestrating or composing because if it's something I always think about working on Seabiscuit, it's about all these people, the horse and all the gentlemen are in the autumn of their lives. And that instruments of autumn were more like the oboe and the English horn, which with all this sort of melancholy, because it's not just the pure sound, it's got a little bit of a buzz to it, and it seems like it's lived a little. And so, I just have these associations that are not, it sounds contrived when I put it in words like this, but it's a genuine response to, I think, maybe even how I feel about Scheherazade or some of these other tone poems. And certainly a lot of the music I know from film that I've worked on.
I think that's a marvelous knack to have. And again, some of that comes back to references as well. How does one know that the sound of a double reed is autumnal, right? And now but you sort of have to know the literature in order to understand where those associations come from, because I don't think it is just simply something that is a given, like the fact that the first, partial is an octave. It's come over time and over the use of people like Beethoven, right?
Beethoven, and you say even in the case of these double reeds, it's I can just specifically say that how Bach uses the oboe in the St. Matthew Passion, and I'm thinking of various arias like Mache dich mein Herzen rein, about burying Christ and that's taking him off the cross and burying him, and how just the theatrical stuff of that, and even going back to Monteverdi, that once you're sort of in music and have an appetite for it, it just, you cry. I mean, even as a child, I'm probably a little bit too sentimental, one would say. But all these great works and the operas, from Bach forward in the cantatas, even the cantata number 4, which is about the bells of death. But the bells of death in this case, it's the flute. And there's just these associations with how I've learned like I've said, music has taught me everything I value in my life. I think it gives me, it teaches you to practice. Like I've said, something else we were talking about, teaches you to pay attention, which is actually a commandment in the Bible about things. And then if you let it shape your emotions or try to hear not only the notes, but deeply into how it makes you feel and never lose the fact of, because many musicians, your feelings can be beaten out of you because it can be a highly technical field. And that's what I always worry about, even in film today, is that the technology is so vast and is so seductive, even as a toy, as a kind of house of mirrors that we can go into in an amusement park that we can partake of, that we can lose the fact of that we're really here as people to communicate other people and emotions in the film and what they're feeling and what we're feeling, and that we can't lose that emotional connection.
You said you maybe were too sentimental. I'm not sure that you can be in this business. This is a craft that blends, when it's most successful, art and commerce in some unique way, but it is essentially about sentiment. And this is the first thing I try to teach composers is you're speaking directly to the amygdala, to the emotional center of the brain. Do that first, dress it up later, worry about structure later, but figure out how you're going to do that first, because it is, of all the places I've worked, probably Hollywood was the most sentimental. Yeah, people can be nasty. Yeah, people can put you down. They can make you cry and all of this, but at the end of the day, people continue to work there because of the powerful sentiment that is created by your engagement with a successful piece of motion picture art. It's a trip.
It's a gift. And as I always say, is that when I had the opportunity to work with James Horner, I was always grateful, because even in pictures I didn't work on, James was somebody that always found the heart of any picture, always found the pain in any picture, always found the joy. And he found a melody and something you could grab onto and take with you out of the theater. And like I always tell people, the kind of music I love is the music I can hear in my head and sing in the shower. And that's the great thing about these great scores with memorable music, is that they never leave you. They can always be with you. And you can have it in the shower where nobody sees you cry or laugh or say, yes, that's part of my, and that's really what we want to, I think that's why I'm in it, because the gift of being in this business is that you're making music for people that don't seek out music, but still need it, still respond to it, particularly when it's linked to an image.
Yeah. Conrad, I'm not going to ask you to be Nostradamus, but I do want to ask you if you believe in your heart of hearts that your craft, as it's defined now, and you probably come as close to defining it as anyone alive, will be around in 50 years.
Yes. Because the one thing I notice, even with the young people here, is that we're still all humans. And we go up and down in terms of our societies and in terms of genius and what we discourage, in terms of how we destroy ourselves. I just wonder how many geniuses or how many great composers are at Passchendaele, at Verdun, wasted in wars throughout this time. But I know that what's so powerful about what we do, as I tend to say, is that we're pre-literate, our vocabulary. We match image, which is pre-literate, with music, which is also pre-literate, that we use to sort of probably celebrate an animal that we were going to eat at some point, but also mourn a death, that it was a way of how we had ritual and could pass things along generation to generation between these things. And so the power of film, even when it was silent, is in the combination of these pre-literate forms, and that's why it speaks to people regardless of education. Because you don't have to have read, God forbid, Finnegan's Wake and understand all of that to respond to motion pictures. And so I'm very hopeful that as long as people care and care deeply, and as long as we don't beat it out of them or that the society doesn't suppress it, There's always going to be people, not like me, but better than me, more in touch than me, because that's what keeps moving everything forward. But we have to make a space for that in ourselves, and we still have to treasure
I
that.
think the question and maybe the worry for me is whether those people who will have the talent, who will have the ability to ultimately do what you do, will be given the time to rise through the profession, to develop in the same way that you were. There's tremendous pressure on these people to do this stuff fast. There's tremendous pressure coming from within a lot of these people to make a lot of money fast.
Oh, yes.
We have to talk about AI because it's on everybody's lips these days. And it's funny, this morning I read something in the New York Times. Apparently there's a glut of fake designer handbags, Dior, Chanel, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, there are just hundreds of thousands of these things that are coming into ports all over the world, presumably from places like Singapore, South Korea, China, wherever they make this stuff. And they're getting so good at this that even upscale buyers, consumers, are now willing to accept the fake Dior. Now, it wasn't too long ago that anybody who knew could just open up the purse or the handbag and look at the seam and tell you whether or not it was the real thing. But I'm not sure that people care as much, just like they don't care whether they're listening to an MP3 or a wave or something like that when it comes to the quality of the audio. So we're approaching a new world. I hesitate to call it a brave new world, where complete works of music produced by artificial intelligence, which with relatively little input from the creator, from whoever it is who's actually putting these pieces together, will be out there on the market. They will get to market faster and cheaper, and they're going to be very tempting products. And this inability that people seem to have sometimes to distinguish between the genuine article and the simulacrum, that does frighten me. If people no longer know how to recognize good wine from bad wine, then it could take artists and artisans like us to a pretty dangerous place. Is there going to be, if you were on a great council of people who were going to decide, how one distinguishes a genuinely original piece of work, a handmade piece of work, from a fake, what sort of standards would you apply to that?
I think the same standards that I would apply to why Beethoven is a great composer and why many of the choices he makes in terms of keys and whatnot in the Seventh Symphony are just so unexpected that I don't think AI would do it. In fact, if I could back up, I know that AI is turning out a ton of words right now. And that's what worries me more is not what AI does, but how we teach people what literature does. Because I'm going to say this about AI telling a joke. A joke, one of the things that makes a joke work is its rhythm and its delivery and how the words are paced and how they sort of come together. Same with a great book and great literature. It's not just the melange and the sort of word salad that you can sort of piece this together. Again, going back to originality of voice, there's a way in which words do have a rhythm, even in Dickens, even in a novel, not just in poetry. And there's something about that unique thing that they have. And I'm not sure, there's no delight in the AI in order finding these words that go together. And that, well, you will have to have an ear for what's delightful. And I sometimes fear that we're only teaching the two-dimensional thing. This is my fear with even computer music or even the sounds in the DAW. Because as I tell the students, every note the computer plays, it hasn't felt, and you can feel that out of it. So when they go, this will be better in the orchestra, I would tell them, well, yes and no. In the orchestra, it won't be as together as it is right now. In the orchestra, it won't be as in tune together as it is right now. Though, because of some of the sample libraries and how poorly put together they are, sometimes they're out of tune too. So that shows the human element in flaws. But what these things will always lack is the genius of, like I tell directors when they're in front of an orchestra, I may have already said this. If you get a demo from me, you're going to have 4 or 5 going on 6 decades of musical experience. When you stand in front of an orchestra like the LSO, you have 2,000 years of musical experience, but 2,000 years of feeling, of life, of knowing how to express things emotionally in the orchestra. And that they'll never have, because every orchestra is different from the personnel that's in it. Every life is different in terms of circumstance, but not in how necessarily how we've responded to grief. We felt grief. We've all responded to that. And joy, and love, and disappointment, and hope, and all these things. And I don't think we'll ever do away with, as long as composers know what it is to perform, and this is why I can say, learn to perform yourself and know yourself. And learn what is special that you wouldn't think to do. Because the AI, in order to find the unique thing, you probably would have to instruct it, because it's not necessarily going to trip itself from A major to C sharp major and have you go like, I'm going to do that. It might do something quite ordinary.
And if it does that, it will probably do it only based on the data and the references that it's been fed. It won't do it because it gives it a sense of delight. See, I would put the ability to feel delight on the 10 Commandments for that counsel. It's almost like you need a different kind of Turing test. It's not just that you can fake people out with language and expression. You really do need to be able to feel your memories and your experiences in order to write the kind of music we call great. Yes?
I think so. And again, it's like AI. It probably wouldn't write Shakespeare, though if it did and it talked about sailing and all the things that Shakespeare knew, it'd know him too well. And likewise, it wouldn't be E.E. Cummings, because it would never guess to have all lower cases and everything
Right.
else and the presentation of that poetry. Now that we know E.E. Cummings, then AI can do that, and our fault is thinking that is it. But yes, I think we have to know that feel delight and not surrender our humanity to what's easy. And the trouble is, in commercial music or commercial entertainment, is that I can already, even with this writer's strike that's going on as we're taping this, I fear that people will just be satisfied with the plots and the word salad that comes, as opposed to. But I think we'll know that it's not genuine.
Yeah.
But again, as long as there are actors, but that's what worries me, is that when we start having the
Well,
the other thing.
That's another story.
I know.
I want to ask you one other thing before we wrap. I want you to talk a little bit about the good times. Now, we could have a lot of fun, you and me, talking about your worst experiences and leaving names out and so forth. We could talk about things as cautionary words to composers. You know, this is what can happen to you if you wind up working with the wrong people. But I think if we take it from the other end, if you give somebody a glass of really good wine and ask them to taste it, and their reaction is, oh, this is what the good stuff tastes like, then I think automatically they're going to develop the discernment to sort of know what the bad stuff is too. So if Conrad Pope tells me about some of his best experiences working with composers, with studio executives, with directors, etc., and what made them good, then I think automatically we kind of know what's not as good or what's to be avoided. So if you can recall from me just a couple of things that just made you say, This is the greatest job on earth. I'm so glad I'm doing this.
I guess one that immediately comes to mind, and it's a small thing, but I was asked to come in and help on a score to a Gary Ross film, Seabiscuit. I've mentioned this before because it was a very satisfying professional experience for me, and I had to take. The composer on the film was Randy Newman, but he wasn't available for this, and I had to do a rewrite of a cue where Seabiscuit has his first ride, and it's about Toby Maguire, I guess, is on back of the horse, and the horse has been not being cooperative in the film, and so it's about Toby Maguire and the horse bond in this particular sequence. And the earlier version of the cue had sort of portrayed the excitement of being on the horse. And Gary wanted something else. He wanted it to show the bond that the horse has. And so before, what I did was that, like I told him, I said, well, then we have to have something that's a little bit more lyrical, and you have to find the right place where you realize that moment, and that sort of has to be the climax of the cue. Let me try something. Jeff Bridges and everybody have given up on the horse. Toby gets on, and the actor's name escapes me right now. He's the trainer, and he says, well, have a good ride. And so when we went off, before they had all this rhythm under the horse riding, but I took that out because I said the horse's hooves will be the rhythm. And so it's this Randy's lyrical theme is going over and keeps developing in the orchestra as the horse builds speed and it keeps going. And they think that the horse has run off again, that the horse has done something, but they've actually bonded. And he screams a big hoop, and then I enter the orchestra, and we were talking with Kathleen Kennedy and Frank Martin. All of us were talking about where's the climate? Do you hit before or after? And I said after, and we did this. And it worked in the scene, and Gary was really happy. Everybody was happy. I was happy. I still think of, it's a moving scene. The music editor was, Pete Miles was extraordinarily happy. And it's one of these things of that, again, with technical stuff, it's a ride through an autumn forest with all the colors of autumn. And the cue has that sense about it too. And of course, what's amazing is that it was shot during the summer, and every leaf was colored by a computer. And so that the whole thing was artificial. But that's when the director's happy, because everybody's put so much into it. And even at another stage, because that's where Gary at one point on another cue reminded me of the stakes in this. We only have one bite at this apple. And so when you have the film editor, maybe the director of photography was there too when we did this cue. And everybody felt exactly like, now this is right. Now this is what we need to have happen. That's when it's all worthwhile. When you sort of feel like, yes, and now other people may feel this if we have. And the only other, one other one that's positive that is not a film, became when I did a film that was the first collaboration between Beijing Film Studios and Universal. And it was a replacement score that I had to do in 2 or 3 weeks, maybe 3 weeks. I got the film and I broke my wrist. And I told no one, because I knew that if they knew I'd broken my wrist, they'd take me off the picture immediately. And so I hid that. I actually had a broken wrist for 4 months. I actually came to Bulgaria and conducted concerts here with a broken wrist. But the point here is that the Chinese producer wanted to have a score that combined elements of Chinese music with Western music and fused these two with basically the sentiment being driven by the Western music. And that was a very satisfying experience because she was happy, the Chinese were happy, and I just remember her saying, I think my ancestors are happy.
Oh, there you go.
And so and she said, I don't think that you think about your ancestors. And I said, oh, I indeed I do, because I'm here because of that. And I had only 2 hours to learn the Chinese instruments and do all but the score came together, and that's when it's great.
That's one of those as good as it gets moments. You know, your profession by definition happens mostly behind the scenes, at least as an
Yes.
orchestrator, not
Sure.
so much when you're composing. Do people thank you? Do you think people understand what you do enough
Yes.
to thank you for it?
Yeah, well, it's a mix. Look, I've had the pleasure and like my joke is, I've worked for every composer in Hollywood, at least once, and I valued all those that I've worked for twice or more.
Right.
But there's nothing more satisfying, particularly with a younger composer or somebody that's less experienced, when they have to have a big action film and I'm brought in to help them do that, to deliver, and have them go, these magic words that no one will hear, particularly the director, thank you, Connie. And I get teared up just even thinking about it. Because as I've said, to be an orchestrator, you have to want to help people.
Yeah.
If you don't want to help people, if you only want to help yourself, I say stay a composer. But if you want to help people and do what they need done, even when it's an impossible, or as John Williams says at times, thankless task, but you go, no, being able to help you when you need it, that's all the thanks I need. That's how I feel. And I'd rather make it. I quote Alan Ferguson, who was a crusty old guy and back from the old days, student of Boulanger, actually was gone to the Boulangerie, I think, with one of my colleagues when I taught at Brandeis University, Harold Shapiro, who said, I'd rather make bad music than no music. But when you can save something, and I've been called in to take somebody's score, another picture I won't mention, where the director said the composer should thank me because he had moved on. This was a big budget film with Universal. I came in, redid the score, and the film still didn't make a lot of money, but everybody was quite thankful. And as the director said, the composer should have bought me a Rolls Royce after that because it saved all of his music.
Gratitude makes me tear up too. I don't need adulation, but you know, it's nice. It is genuinely nice to be appreciated. Now, last question. You said that you didn't have your Oscar speech prepared, but so I'm going to give you a chance now to who would you like to thank for everything good that's happened to you along the way? I'm asking this for a reason because I do think you don't do this without mentors. Or in Hollywood, they always used to ask me who my rabbi was, you know, who was opening doors for me. Somebody believes in you at some point and gives you a shot. And if you're ready to take that shot, that's usually where things begin. But, you know, go back as far as you want, but tell me some of the people who you would want to thank in your Oscar speech, should you ever give it.
Well, in terms of film, it's like everyone else. I have to thank almost everybody that's been in my family, either from parents to my wife, to the kids, all that stuff, because it can take a toll on all those things, and you have to be supported there. Professionally, because I know that that's the typical story, and I don't need to mention that, but I have. I first started out as an academic because that's what I was groomed to be, because I thought that would be what a serious concert composer did. I hated it, and I got out of it, and so I had a grant from the New York State Arts Council to write a piano concerto. I wouldn't say this is an Oscar piece. The band would already have played me off. But I moved back to California. I actually grew up basically in California, but I'd been spending most of my time on the East Coast. And I started taking classes at UCLA, and I'd won medals, awards, and various things over my time. Had many grants. I won't go into everything, but I took a orchestration class, and I didn't tell the teacher that I'm actually an educated musician, and I just kept my mouth shut. as he said, one day we assigned a string quartet, and he said, do something like the Ravel String Quartet. And he said there was this guy that wrote the Ravel String Quartet, but it was like the second Ravel String Quartet. It wasn't the Ravel String Quartet. And so he got in a jam where he needed some music written in an afternoon, and he called me, and like I tell students, I'm very grateful for that call, because I know that when he called me, there had been a list of 10 other people that had said no. And he was scared to death. And he was scared that I was going to screw him because I wouldn't be able to deliver. And I had to prove I could deliver, because it was very important. It was this live show that was going on that night. And I went to the copyist's house, and I wrote the music at the copyist's kitchen table. So I'd have to thank Mark Waters, who now teaches at Eastman School orchestration. He was the first person that took a chance, that made a call to me that he didn't want to make. And he was the first person that got me into the bottom of the business.
He's a sweetheart. I took those UCLA Extension orchestration classes from him as well. Probably a little later than you, but more or less the same period. Great guy.
Great guy. And then I have to thank Arthur Morton, who was Jerry Goldsmith's orchestrator, because I sent out over 400 postcards in those days. And I know how people hate to say no in Hollywood. So I made it easy for them. On the postcard said, you could check a box that said, yes, please sing cassette at this time, or no cassette at this time. So it was never a hard no, a soft landing. And one day on this green dial-up phone in my apartment in Encino, dial-up phone, it was so old, the call came, and it was Arthur Morton. And he said, well, and I'd sent him my reel of orchestrations and arrangements I'd made for Richard Gibbs, I guess, at that time. And so, in any case, he said, I know nothing about composing, but I can help you with orchestration. And he introduced me to Joanne Kane. And through Joanne Kane, working at her office, doing takedowns and proofreading and things like that, and doing sound alikes for Richard Kaufman and MGM at that time, I slowly came into working with John Williams, doing source music. And Joanne took a chance on me. John took a chance on me. And then John Neufeld took me under his wing. And through him, I started working with James Horner. And the rest is then, as you know, things spread like wildfire.
Yeah, well, you know that famous scene in When Harry Met Sally, when Meg Ryan is faking the orgasm?
Yeah.
And the lady at the other table says, I'll have what she's having. I suspect that's what happened to you as this thing grew. People started to hear the results of your work on these films and said, I'll have what they're having.
Yes, and that resulted in Paramount then calling me when they got in trouble.
Yeah.
Warner's calling me when they got in trouble. It's like even with The Hobbit, it was always Warner Brothers. They called me, and so I've been very grateful. I've always tried to do my best. Hasn't always worked out with everybody, but I'm very grateful for everything I've been having to do. It's given me a great life. I've been able to support a family, and live and still be human about it. And so I just like to thank everybody.
Well, I'm happy to say that in my universe, at least, Conrad, the Oscar for most delightful orchestration goes to Conrad.
Well, thank you so very much, Andy.
Thank you so much for being here with my students this week and for putting aside the time to do this. I think it'll be of great benefit to everybody who takes the time to listen to it.
Well, thank you so much. And I think I encourage everybody, every musician, to do what one of my teachers said. A good musician plays a little, thinks a little, and teaches a little. This is an apprenticeship business, and they have to be around people that actually do it and to help them. So,
all right.
Thanks, Andy. Thanks for always asking me.
Ciao, ciao.
Ciao.